In the year 1492, a single voyage across the Atlantic altered the course of human history. Christopher Columbus, sailing under the Spanish crown, believed he had found a shortcut to Asia. Instead, he stumbled into a world that Europeans barely knew existed. The Americas were not empty wildernesses. They were home to tens of millions of people. Some lived in vast empires, like the Aztec and Inca, with advanced cities, roads, and trade. Others lived in complex tribal confederations, from the Iroquois in the Northeast to the powerful Mississippian mound builders near the Mississippi River. They had their own governments, religions, and societies. But all of that would soon collide with European ambition. The meeting of these worlds was not just discovery. It was conquest. Disease, colonization, and war unleashed devastation, wiping out entire peoples and cultures. The Spanish were the first to dominate the Americas. Conquistadors like Hernán Cortés and Francisco Pizarro toppled empires in Mexico and Peru, and Spanish rule extended across Central and South America. France pushed into Canada, and the Dutch explored the Hudson River Valley. But it was England, late to the race, that would plant the seeds of what became the United States. In 1607, a small group of English settlers founded Jamestown in Virginia. Life was hard. They battled hunger, disease, and conflicts with native tribes. Only the cultivation of tobacco, a crop that became Europe's craze, saved the colony. 13 colonies eventually stretched along the Atlantic coast. Each had its own character. New England was religious and community-driven. The middle colonies were diverse, with Dutch, German, Irish, and Swedish settlers. The southern colonies thrived on plantations built on the backs of enslaved Africans. By 1700, slavery had become a brutal cornerstone of American life. Ships brought millions of Africans across the Middle Passage in chains. Families were torn apart, and generations would live and die in bondage. America proclaimed freedom, but relied on slavery. It was a contradiction that would haunt the nation. By the mid-18th century, the colonies were flourishing. Yet their success created tension. Britain, ruling from across the ocean, demanded taxes and obedience. Colonists began to question, why should they pay taxes to a government where they had no voice? Pamphlets, speeches, and protests spread radical ideas: liberty, representation, self-government. These weren't abstract debates. They were sparks of revolution. In 1775, musket fire cracked the air at Lexington and Concord. Farmers and shopkeepers fought British redcoats, and the American Revolution began. It was a David versus Goliath struggle. Britain had the largest navy and one of the strongest armies on earth. The colonies had militia, determination, and leaders like George Washington. France, seizing a chance to weaken Britain, joined the American side, providing money, ships, and soldiers. The war dragged on for 8 long years, filled with hardship and sacrifice. But in 1783, against the odds, the colonies won. The Treaty of Paris recognized a new nation, the United States of America, but independence raised new questions. How should this new nation be governed? The first attempt, the Articles of Confederation, proved too weak. States quarreled, the economy stumbled. In 1787, leaders gathered in Philadelphia and drafted the Constitution. It created a federal system with checks and balances, an executive, legislature, and judiciary. It was daring, but fragile. Could such a system hold together? For the next decades, America expanded. The Louisiana Purchase in 1803 doubled its size. Pioneers pushed westward, cutting forests, building towns, and displacing Native Americans. The expansion was brutal. Native tribes were forced off their lands, sometimes through treaties, often through violence. The Trail of Tears in the 1830s saw thousands of Cherokee and others marched from their homelands, many dying on the way. For Native Americans, the story of America was not liberty, but loss. Meanwhile, a deeper conflict was growing. The North industrialized, drawing immigrants and building cities. The South clung to agriculture, fueled by enslaved labor. Could a nation built on the ideals of freedom continue to tolerate slavery? Every new state added to the Union threatened to tip the balance. Compromises postponed the reckoning, but the issue was unavoidable. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected president on a platform opposing the spread of slavery. Southern states, fearing the end of their system, seceded. 11 states formed the Confederacy. The Civil War began in 1861. It was the bloodiest conflict in American history. Brother fought brother, cities burned. Fields became graveyards. The Union had industry and manpower. The Confederacy had determination and skilled generals. For 4 years, the fate of the nation hung in the balance. In 1863, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring enslaved people in Confederate states free. The war became not just about Union, but about liberty itself. At Gettysburg, the Union turned the tide. In 1865, Confederate forces surrendered. The Union was saved, slavery abolished. But the scars were deep. More than 600,000 dead, cities in ruins, families shattered. And though slavery ended, racism and segregation endured. Reconstruction tried to rebuild the South and grant rights to freedmen. For a brief moment, black men voted, held office, and built communities. But white supremacist backlash, violence, and Jim Crow laws rolled back those gains for nearly a century. As the 19th century closed, America transformed again. Railroads stitched the country together. Immigrants flooded in, Irish, Italians, Jews, Chinese, and more, bringing cultures and languages, but also facing prejudice. Factories rose, producing steel, textiles, and machinery. America became an industrial giant, but with wealth came poverty. Children worked in mines. Workers toiled in dangerous mills. Labor strikes erupted, demanding rights. The divide between rich and poor grew wide. Meanwhile, Native Americans were pushed onto reservations. The last great resistance ended in 1890 at Wounded Knee, where U.S. troops massacred Lakota men, women, and children. The frontier was closed. America's gaze turned outward. In 1898, war with Spain gave the U.S. new territories: Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. America had become an empire. Soon, it was entangled in global affairs. In 1917, the U.S. entered World War I. Its industry and soldiers tipped the balance, helping the Allies win. President Woodrow Wilson dreamed of a League of Nations, a new world order of peace. But Americans turned inward, weary of war. The 1920s roared with jazz, flappers, cars, and radios. Cities grew, culture flourished, and America became a global cultural force. But prosperity was fragile. In 1929, the stock market crashed. Banks failed. Unemployment soared. Families lost homes and farms. The Great Depression was devastating. Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal offered hope. Government programs created jobs, built dams, and supported the poor. For the first time, Americans looked to Washington not just for laws, but for survival. Then came World War II. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in 1941, America was thrust into the deadliest conflict in history. Soldiers fought in Europe, North Africa, and the Pacific. At home, factories produced tanks and planes at incredible speed. Women entered the workforce in massive numbers. Japanese Americans, however, were forced into internment camps, a dark chapter of fear and prejudice. In 1945, the war ended with Nazi Germany defeated and Japan devastated by atomic bombs. America emerged as the most powerful nation on Earth, but victory gave way to rivalry. The Soviet Union, once an ally, became a competitor. The Cold War began, a contest of ideology, influence, and power. Nuclear weapons hung over the world like a shadow. The Korean War, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the Vietnam War tested America's will. At home, the fear of communism spread, leading to suspicion and paranoia. Yet the Cold War also drove innovation. America landed men on the moon in 1969, a triumph of technology and determination. Meanwhile, social revolutions shook the nation. The civil rights movement challenged segregation and injustice. Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream inspired millions, while march, sit-ins, and protests demanded equality. Laws changed, barriers fell, but struggles continued. Feminists pushed for gender equality. Native Americans, Latinos, and LGBTQ Americans demanded recognition and rights. America was changing, not always smoothly, but relentlessly. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. The Cold War ended. America stood as the world's sole superpower. The 1990s brought economic growth, the rise of the internet, and globalization. American culture, from movies to music, reached every corner of the globe. But new dangers emerged. On September 11, 2001, terrorists struck New York and Washington, killing nearly 3,000 people. The War on Terror began. U.S. forces invaded Afghanistan and later Iraq. The wars dragged on, costing lives and treasure, sparking debates about America's role in the world. At home, the 2008 financial crisis shook the economy. Banks collapsed, homes were lost, and millions suffered. The crisis deepened political divisions. In 2008, America elected its first black president, Barack Obama, a milestone in the long struggle for equality. But polarization grew. Immigration, healthcare, guns, and culture wars divided the nation. At home, the 2008 financial crisis shook the economy. Banks collapsed, homes were lost, and millions suffered. The crisis deepened political divisions. In 2008, America elected its first black president, Barack Obama, a milestone in the long struggle for equality. But polarization grew. Immigration, healthcare, guns, and culture wars divided the nation. The 2010s brought new challenges. Technology transformed daily life, but also spread misinformation. Social media connected billions, yet fueled anger and division. Political battles grew more bitter. Then, in 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic struck. Millions were infected. Hundreds of thousands died, and society was disrupted. The crisis revealed both the strengths and weaknesses of America: innovation, vaccines, and resilience, but also inequality, mistrust, and division. Today, America stands at a crossroads. It is still the world's largest economy, a global military power, and a beacon of culture and technology. But it also faces immense challenges: climate change, political polarization, inequality, and questions about its role in a shifting world. The history of America is a story of contradictions. A land of liberty that tolerated slavery. A nation of immigrants that feared newcomers. A global power that sometimes faltered at home. Yet it is also a story of resilience. Time and again, America has faced crises: revolution, civil war, depression, world wars, terrorism, pandemics, and emerged transformed. From the first encounters in 1492 to the superpower struggles of today, America's story is not finished. It is still being written by every citizen, every election, every challenge, and every dream. And perhaps that is the greatest legacy of all, that a nation, imperfect and unfinished, continues to reinvent itself, striving toward the ideals it first declared: liberty, equality, and the pursuit of happiness.